This is Arjun here, and the head of research at InvestorKit Buyers Agency. I've got a good catch up today with a dear friend of ours, and also now working as part of the InvestorKit team, which is pretty special. I've got Lorna, who's worked closely with us for numerous years, and her story is phenomenal, and I can't wait to hear more about it today. But we've worked closely together to purchase multiple properties, taking her portfolio to 5 places in a very, very short amount of time. It's generated a heavy level of passive income, diversity, hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity growth, and more importantly, it's set up a really good foundation for the long term for wealth building. But that too during the middle of a pandemic, which is quite unique considering many actually obviously stood back and let that time come up to kind of figure things out. So today we'll hear from Lorna, deep dive into her journey and reflecting on that. So there's tips to take away for everyone watching to be able to apply it to their own journey and hopefully see some of the results that she's seen as well. So Lorna, welcome and thank you for joining.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's nice to hear from you.
Yeah, Lorna, I obviously gave listeners and watchers a little bit of intel about the journey to date, but can I take you back to the first property, which we didn't purchase together, but it was your first purchase on your own many years ago. Could you talk to me about what inspired that first place, how you feel about it looking back now, and the importance of what that's done for you in terms of the pros and learnings? I'm really keen to deep dive into where it all started.
Yeah, so I guess, I've always heard of property investing and, obviously property, I guess, doubles in value over the every 10 years, that sort of thing. So I saw it as, I guess, a good way to kind of create wealth and build from there. I guess when I look back on that journey, I was kind of just, I just went to the bank, saw what I could borrow, and then went and purchased what I knew. So like I ended up purchasing in a location where, I understood where, like I was in the area, I knew of the area, and it was just something that I was like, oh yeah, this would be, I guess, a good investment to potentially grow. So a lot of that purchase was basically on, I guess, hopes and assumptions. So, assuming it is going to grow in value. And what I realized was back when I purchased that in 2014, and obviously properties since then has like boomed like crazy in Sydney. What I didn't realize was it wasn't a great investment. It wasn't a great purchase. It was more, I could just purchase it because, that was the sort of money I could borrow at the time. So yeah, that's why I purchased that.
I guess that shows really a lot about the whole sometimes what's easiest isn't what's best, right? Because you talked about how Sydney took off and boomed, but that property didn't do that as much. It also teaches me the lesson of asset types, like units versus houses and things like that. When you look back at that journey, there was a period of inactivity, which was that first purchase, and then the second purchase, which is when we connected and purchased your first investment property, borderless and interstate. What was that inactivity period like for you, from a kind of things going on in your mind that created that inactivity? I just want to understand the thinking that went on around that period, because there was obviously so much action in recent times and then a big gap. It's just good to understand what was going through your mind at that time.
Yeah, so I guess over that period, over 5 years of holding it, I was just kind of like, oh, maybe I could borrow more eventually. And just seeing what I could buy in Sydney, it just wasn't what I wanted, again, because I knew like I was only going to be able to buy a property where it was basically an apartment, a unit, and to then go through that asset again and it not grow in value. And by the time, like, obviously I experienced that boom in Sydney, I realized, yeah, okay, units aren't great for an investment. Yeah, that's where it was at, essentially.
Now, when you did go for the second one, what made you want to then commit to hard, like scaling the portfolio? Because this journey really took off for you, irrespective of times like COVID and other things like that. What was going through your mind that just made you flick on this whole new switch?
I think our chats with you, like my first chat with you was like kind of was a real eye-opener. You know, you at the time had, you know, 9 properties at like the age of 27 or something ridiculous. And I think I was like, oh gosh, I've like missed out. You know, like I don't know if I could purchase that many. You know, I think seeing what you were able to experience kind of really let me like be like, yeah, I can do this.
And when you were like kind of using that as inspiration, were there any doubts going through your mind though, considering, you know, the pandemic hit shores and that didn't stop you at all? What did you do for yourself internally to make yourself feel like, oh no, I'm just going to keep pushing along? Because I guess inspiration is the spark, but then sometimes it still needs that push afterwards. What was the push for you internally that you kind of think back that not only you can apply to COVID, but I guess applying any time in the future now that you've done that?
Yeah, so I guess I see property as like it's one of the most, you know, basic human requirements. You know, it's essentially shelter. Like, you know, everyone, there is always going to be a need. And I guess the way I saw it was property was always going to be protected, you know. And so that's why, like, even going through COVID, it didn't, you know, speaking with you and like, you know, you having that knowledge as well, someone there to support me through that process, it just was a lot easier to kind of, you know, it was a peace of mind thing.
It's such a simple but powerful point, like property being shelter, right? And many people don't think of that. They sometimes think of it's this game, it's an investment. It's like you got to perfect this game and you got to get it right. Well, no, it's not like that. You know, 6.5 out of every 10 are usually owner occupiers. And then the others are not investments that are just gambling. They are literally rental properties creating shelter for the tenants who are either looking to rent for lifestyle or just housing shelters, the basic need, or one day go to buy as well. So very few properties are out there, although there's very few properties out there that are just going to be a vacant gamble. Like the majority of it is that need of shelter. So it just makes so much sense when you think about it that way. Now, when you went to your first investment with us, there was obviously the component of this being outside of your backyard, and it was back in Adelaide in 2019. What were some of the things going on at that time for you when you reflect back on that purchase? Things that you felt worked really well, or things that you felt like, hey, if I had my time again, I probably wouldn't have that same thinking or do it differently? Because I noticed as the purchases went along, your comfort, your thinking, your view on things started changing as well.
Yeah, so I guess with the first purchase through you guys, because it was a capital city, I think I was a lot more comfortable with that. You know, I just, you know, it was big population, you know, I live in a city myself, so that's kind of where it kind of eased my mind to kind of go into state. And at the end of the day, like, you know, you guys had people on the ground and be able to view the properties, show me like the videos, that sort of thing. So it's not like a real estate agent there, like just showing those like stock standard professional photos. So yeah.
So that was the big piece on the comfort part, right? That helped. But I remember do you remember when this is always as a good laugh. Like, do you remember when we were talking about the place and you were just like the numbers are good, the place is good, like everything was ticking these boxes. And I thought, all right, cool, sounds good, Lorna. And you're like, but I don't like how it doesn't have built-in robes, and we were making this big deal about built-in robes. Remember that moment? What's that moment like for you now, looking back at it?
Yeah, like I remember thinking that I was like, oh my gosh, like I wouldn't live in a place that didn't have built-in roads. And I think like when it came down to like an investment, I was like, oh, like I realized like I was really emotional about that purchase because it didn't have those robes, because I wouldn't live there. Like I wouldn't live in a property that didn't have robes. So I mean, yeah, the numbers, I guess, worked really well. And I could see myself like holding the property with like it didn't really affect my lifestyle essentially. So yeah, it was a good learning curve. It was a good thing to experience, but then it kind of changed my mindset to realize, hang on, like it's not about that. It's not about those like little details, you know, and it's like about the bigger picture at the end of the day.
Now, that's such a good tip for, I guess, any other buyers, because, you know, people can sometimes sweat the small stuff. And not saying that's not important when you have money on the line, property investing and things like that. But it's about coming back to that bigger picture. So I'm really glad that you can reflect on it and, provide that tip. Now, on that first property, that performed extremely well. And from a capital growth perspective, that was a key part to your journey. But you very quickly then went to the second purchase, and you then went to the third and the fourth, and you experienced cities like Brisbane, Bendigo, Adelaide. Can you talk about your first experience going to a regional market like Bendigo? Because that too was like outside of your comfort zone. However, on reflection, it's actually been one of, if not the best performer in your portfolio.
Yeah, so when we sat down and kind of like talked about the next purchase, you'd given me, I guess you gave me the research behind, I guess, Ballarat, and you had told me at the time, like Ballarat, had kind of taken off, it had that boom, that sort of thing. And I guess, you saw those signs that were going, you saw those signs in Bendigo as well. That were, you saw it was going to take on and take off. And I guess there was the research behind everything that you showed me to kind of give me that confidence to be like, okay, yeah, let's try and purchase in a regional town.
And when you think of the research, looking back at that and linking it back to the importance that I guess, or role we played, could you talk more about that sort of challenges that it solved for you? Because, you come from a professional background, you know what it is in terms of, helping other professionals, and based on what you did in the HR space. Could you talk about, I guess, the challenges working with us solved for you, just to understand how that research came into play?
Yeah, it just gave me that confidence to just be like, I can purchase something that is, that I haven't ever seen before, that I, a location that I, never thought to purchase in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. So, I guess from there, this is an important point, and I didn't realize this until recently. And me and you were chatting offline about this, but when you make 4 purchases with a buyer's agent, obviously it's not cheap. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's over $50,000 in professional fees. Now, this is on a one-time transaction. You might go, okay, well, makes sense. But then 2, 3, 4 times you've purchased with us and taken on that investment. How do you kind of quantify the value for yourself when you look at that and making that level of investment for professional support? And what sort of tips do you have for others considering, substantial investments into professional support to build a portfolio like you have for yourself?
Yeah, so when I first met you, I guess, when I first got told about the fee, I was like, okay, that's quite a lot. That's like, that's quite a bit of my own deposit, right? And I was like, oh man, like I'd never known anyone. Well, I'd never even heard of a buyer's agent, for one. Didn't even know this profession existed. I didn't know anyone else other than my mortgage broker who had used you, and they're the one that referred me. And I was like, okay, that's yeah, a fair bit. But then I thought about it this way. I was like, obviously you're 27, you held 9 properties. How did you get there? And I think I was like, okay, well, obviously you've got the experience. And then I thought about, I guess, obviously you were going to take me on, show me how you were going to purchase it. So I was like, maybe that education piece I could learn and potentially utilize what I learn, and then maybe purchase the subsequent ones on my own. And then I thought, this is a service. So obviously I've got to pay for your time to kind of go and purchase that property. And then I also thought about, at the end of the day, when I use your service, I'm going to get an investment property out of it. So I'll have a product at the end of the day, something that I wouldn't have had if I was to do it on my own. So that's kind of how I justified the first time I paid for that fee. And yeah, the rest, I guess, yeah, it just kind of became, I think even with the second one, actually thinking about it, I think with the second one, after the first one, I had your research reports, your suburb reports and everything. And I was like, okay, maybe I can do it on my own, or at least try to, and understand, what you were looking for, etc. But I think, I guess, when it came down to it, and like the time it took, the research it took, and actually it was just really confusing to just, like, I guess, do it on my own. So that's why essentially I've gone down and, I guess, bought 4 off you because you were able to help me, and it just became so easy.
That's such a powerful way to look at it, right? There's a component of education on the journey. There's a component of time, the confidence in the decision making, the research, and the comfort and peace of mind that you get around knowing that you've got that support with you rather than having to take it on all your own. It's actually so underestimated when it comes to the time it takes, or the actual confidence component to be able to go, hey, I'm going outside my backyard, taking research to a whole new level, and focusing on this thing full time. So appreciate you really giving me a good glance on that, because it's actually the first time I've detailed spoken to you about it, but it's interesting how on reflection, how it all comes together. Now, Lorna, I know you would have mentioned, you heard I mentioned at the start of this chat, from client to 4 times purchases with us, lots of equity, cash flow, all these things coming together, to now actually working with us. Now, this is pretty special. And I know, like, you've always been one to kind of, combine passion and, I guess, purpose with what you've liked. Has that been a big part of kind of joining the team and the appreciation for kind of what happens in the background of it? Just keen to understand more about how all these worlds now connect for you.
Yeah, obviously, I've gone through, my journey as a client through, InvestorKit, and I guess I've been able to see the benefits in what you do, and like how you can change someone's life through, I guess, investing in property and helping people actually understand it's not just like, oh, you just buy and hold. Like, there's a whole strategy behind it. And that's why, like, there are people out there that own, 5+ properties, 10+ properties, so yeah, I want to, I guess, yeah, at the end of the day, I've joined you guys to, help people be able to achieve the same thing.
That's exciting, and we're really pumped to have you and obviously be on this journey together now to help others. Lorna, keen to hear from you finally on one last thing, which is, now that you've put this portfolio together in such short time and seen such substantial equity growth and cash flow, what's sort of next for you on the property investing journey? Is it much of the same? Is there a certain age that you're trying to acquire to, or a certain number in income? What's kind of on your mind?
So I guess at the moment, but my purchasing capacity has like slowed down a little bit. So I'm just, potentially just holding it on for now. We'll eventually pull out the equity, buy some more. But I think the main thing is, like, having created some wealth in the background, I feel like I can kind of take a step back and just maybe like relax a little bit more, or just, I don't know, focus on other things that I haven't been able to focus over the past couple of years. So I think, it's just essentially given me those options to do what I want, and do what I love, and like, I do really love property. But yeah, that's why, that's where I'm at.
I think the power of what you just said there is that when you do create such a substantial pool of assets, what it does is it gets this baseline of compounding wealth. And it's kind of this really powerful thing that I always speak to clients about, which is, if you've got a 5 mil pool of properties, 5% is 250,000 in wealth being generated behind the scenes in each given year. And really, it's about tactfully working, seeing the right research, the finance strategies, the aggression in buying, to get that pool as big as possible, which you've done. Because now what happens is that, whether it's time off traveling, whether it's time off exploring other careers, whether it's time off for personally, it's not like there's no work being done behind the scenes. Like, behind the scenes, hundreds of thousands of equity and growth can still happen just as you live a normal life, or go back to anything that you're trying to do on the side, or focus on in other parts of life. So I totally get where you're coming from. It's such a powerful thing that you've set up for yourself, and hats off to you on the success you've had to date. So thank you so much, Lorna, for the time here. And no doubt many others will you see the importance of some of the tips you shared and kill it with their own respective journeys.
Yeah, thanks so much, Arjun. Really
Cheers.
appreciate it.